the past 30 years, our industry has been in decline.
The skills that we once knew in this industry were torn away by the Conservatives, and ever since we've never looked back.
Imagine a leader who will invest £500 billion into the British economy.
Imagine a leader that will invest in new, high-tech industries to give young people the opportunities and jobs that they deserve.
Imagine a leader who believes that education is a right and not a privilege.
Imagine a leader who will stand up to exploitative employers and demand that young people are treated and paid fairly.
Imagine a leader that genuinely cares about everyone in society.
That leader is
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay, so it's very nice to have you here in the North East, Jeremy. So basically, there's a lot of young people in this region at the moment are feeling sort of very disillusioned with the way their life is at the moment. Now, if you had came here a few years ago, you would have seen a lot more industry. Young people had opportunities, they had greater job security, and they had enough money to be able to provide for their families. And obviously today you've got a lot of young people who come from very skilled backgrounds and have a lot of natural talent in those areas. And unfortunately, they're being forced into horrific jobs on zero-hour contracts, getting paid minimum wage. So could you just outline to us, and to obviously people watching, sort of what your economic alternative is and how you plan to bring back investment in this region?
Thanks for the question, really good. Firstly, on employment issues, 0 hours contracts have got to go. There's got to be minimum hours contracts so everyone knows excuse me, what their income's going to be. Secondly, the youth wage or the national minimum wage must disappear. It must be the same minimum wage for all. It's ridiculous. If you're a young person, you eat as much as an older person. And the apprentice rate must be the minimum wage rate, not the apprentice rate, which has become appalling levels of exploitation. There also has to be better quality apprenticeships on training, because too many of them are actually a substitute for cheap labour, which are being called apprenticeships when they're not really being trained very much at all. And thirdly, it's about investment in regenerating industries altogether. I spent a very interesting day at the STEM Centre in Middlesbrough, going through the quality of the apprenticeships that many of the people have there. They weren't all just young people. Some were people that were retraining in new skills. Some of them are doing robotic technology, some of them are doing very high technology, computer-based engineering and computer-based design. And all of them were very excited about what they were doing. But the companies that were existing locally and wanting to develop were all saying they had problems about borrowing money in order to invest. And so we will have a national investment bank and a regional investment bank, so we'll get those new companies going. In the speech I just made in the council chamber, we were talking about environmental technology in Britain. We have the most amazing levels of skills. The North East was the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. So much was developed in this area, and it's very high tech, very great abilities of a lot of people all across the region. But a lack of investment means that those industries, the big industries, have declined. The smaller industries haven't grown as much as they could. And so our plan is to give loans for cheap loans for investment where jobs are created, to invest in the whole region, and also encourage cooperative ownership of industries.
Brilliant, brilliant. So the second question is, obviously the North East, can we get some water, please? So the North East obviously was a very large labour heartland. Now, in the North East, there's a lot of people who have been very disillusioned because of, the sort of new Labour project and how, a lot of people saw hospitals being privatised, elements of the NHS being privatised. So, can you explain to us now why a Labour government under your leadership would be radically different from those neoliberal policies of the past?
The great tragedy of the 90s was that Labour adopted the third way in economics, which was about bringing private finance in to run public services. And at one level it sounds all fine and dandy, that's all right, there's some private money coming in, we'll get a new hospital, we'll get a new school, that'll be okay. And then you suddenly realise 5 years later, the public don't own the school, don't own the hospital, and have to pay through the nose just to use it. I want all public buildings to be publicly owned and publicly financed through government loans in order to pay for the development over 60 years, not these short-term PFI loans, some of which are now owned by offshore tax haven based companies. And so that way we will then have the funding back into the hospitals. Every hospital in Britain is in debt or deficit at the moment, mainly because of the private finance initiative.
Definitely brilliant. And
I just wanted to ask you briefly about the environment, which is quite a big topic. I don't think you can talk about it briefly, but you've touched upon in your message in the council chamber that Labour wants to be the party of a greener future. So I just wanted you to outline to us and to the people that might be watching, what is Labour's policy on the environment? Because after all, it is young people that will have to face the consequences of climate change.
Thanks for the question, and it is young people who are going to live a lot longer than people like me, and therefore going to have to deal with the consequences of environmental degradation. So the first thing we've got to recognise, all of us, is that our planet is finite, the resources we've got are finite, and our ecosystem is very important to all of us. And so maintaining biodiversity is something that is very important in agricultural policies as well as marine policies. It doesn't mean you stop all farming, it doesn't mean you stop all fishing, it means you do it in a better and more sustainable way. And then you start looking at levels of pollution as well as greenhouse gas emission. Pollution levels have improved a bit over the years. There was a time when we were exporting sulfur dioxide through the air to Norway, and that was killing their forests. That acid rain that was falling on Norway doesn't fall now because there has been some degree of controls on that. There have been some big improvements. For example, the Montreal Agreement did quite a lot to end the use of chlorofluorocarbons, which in turn has protected the ozone layer. But there's a lot further to go. And so we want, A, to promote sustainable energy in Britain, which means locally owned, local authority run or cooperatively run energy generation, wind generation, solar generation, wave generation, the hot air generation by taking hot air from wherever it might otherwise be wasted. So in London, for example, in my borough, there are about 1,000 homes being heated by heat that would otherwise be wasted from the underground system because they've got a heat exchanger. All those kind of things are quite possible with a bit of imagination. So we start using our imagination. The other area is on how we actually export pollution. If you think about it, when we used to have polluting industries in Britain, the Tyne was a pretty polluted river. It's not so polluted now. In fact, it's a lot cleaner. It's a lot better than it ever was. Most rivers in Britain are a lot better than they ever were, for two reasons. One is partly better environmental regulation, most of which has come through the European Union, but it's also because, quite honestly, there's fewer polluting industries. But when we do trade with other people, we've also got to be quite tough about the regulations we impose on imported goods. Otherwise, if we would not produce something here that emits a lot of plastic waste, which is very damaging to the environment, to wildlife and everything else, we do that for a reason, because we want to protect the environment. I want the same for China. I want the same for India. I want the same for Indonesia. So trade agreements are also part of it, which is why I've spent a lot of time dealing with environmental groups and working with them, and I went to the Paris Climate Change Conference, which I found absolutely fascinating and actually quite inspiring. People from often very poor communities around the world saying, well, actually, the effects of climate change are greater on the people of Bolivia than they are on us, because the glaciers have melted, therefore the water flow into their lakes has diminished, therefore their water supply has diminished, therefore they end up with desertification of their country. And he was saying different kinds of stories all over. We've got to work with the environment, not against the environment.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah.